I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with yourself when you answer it. Is there something you know you should be doing? Something you genuinely want to do? Something that would change your life if you did it, that you haven't done yet? Not because you don't have time, not because you don't know how, but because every time you get close to it, something inside you pumps the brakes. You find a reason to wait. You convince yourself it's not the right moment. You get busy with something else and tell yourself you'll come back to it later. And then later comes, and you do the same thing. That's fear, not the scary movie kind, not the kind you feel when something actually dangerous is in front of you. This is the quiet kind, the invisible kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself as fear. It disguises itself as logic, as caution, as being realistic, as just not being ready yet. And this kind of fear is far more dangerous than the loud kind, because the loud kind you can see, you can name it, you can face it. But the quiet kind, it runs your life from behind the scenes and you never even notice. Today we go after it directly. Stay until the end, and I'm going to give you a simple, concrete practice built from 2,000 years of Stoic philosophy for looking fear in the face and choosing to move anyway. Not by becoming fearless, by becoming someone who acts in spite of fear. That's completely different, and it's what actually works. Last episode, we talked about why most people stay average, and we found that the core reason is a story, a set of beliefs about what is possible for them that they've never actually questioned. We built the belief audit: catch the limiting thought, ask whether it's actually true, replace it with a genuine question. Today we go one layer deeper, because underneath most of those limiting stories, if you dig far enough, you find the same thing: fear. Fear of failing, fear of what people will think, fear of starting something and not being good enough, fear of losing what you already have by reaching for something more. Fear is the engine underneath average, and this episode is about shutting that engine down. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell. This series builds episode by episode, and what's coming in season 2 goes to places most people never look. You want to be here for it. Part 1. The fear you don't know you have. Most people think of fear as a feeling, and they think if they're not feeling scared, they're not afraid. So when they procrastinate, when they avoid, when they keep finding reasons not to start, they don't call it fear. They call it being busy, being realistic, being smart about the timing. But here's what the Stoics understood that is incredibly useful. Fear doesn't always show up as a feeling. Sometimes it shows up as a behavior. You clean your house instead of working on the project. You research for weeks instead of starting. You talk about your idea instead of building it. You take another course instead of launching. You spend an hour getting everything perfectly organized so you can finally begin. And then something else comes up. That's fear, dressed up as productivity, dressed up as responsibility, dressed up as common sense. The Stoics called these phantom fears, fears that operate below the surface, that you feel in your behavior before you feel them in your chest. And they argued that these are the most important ones to find and examine, because the fear you can't name has unlimited power over you. Seneca wrote about this with a directness that still lands hard 2,000 years later. He had watched friends of his, intelligent, capable, ambitious men, live their entire lives circling the thing they actually wanted, never quite getting close enough to touch it. Always something in the way, always one more preparation needed. And he saw it clearly for what it was. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. Seneca, Letters to Lucilius. This line is one of the most practically useful things ever written, because what it says is this: the fear you feel before you do the thing is almost always worse than the thing itself. The worst-case scenario that lives in your mind is almost always more terrifying than any actual outcome you'll face. Think about something you've been afraid to do, the conversation you've been putting off, the project you've been avoiding, the change you know you need to make. Now think about times in your life when you finally did the scary thing. How many times was it actually as bad as you imagined? How many times was it easier than you expected? How many times did you look back and think, why did I wait so long? Almost every time. The suffering was in the waiting. The fear was in the imagination. Reality, when you actually stepped into it, was something you could handle. Part 2. The 4 Faces of Fear. Let me describe 4 specific versions of the fear that is probably operating in your life right now. As I describe each one, see if you recognize yourself. This is the most obvious one, and it feels the most logical. If I try and fail, I will have wasted time, energy, and maybe money. I'll have to face the disappointment. Other people will see that I tried and didn't make it. It's better not to try at all than to try and fail publicly. This kind of fear has stopped more good things from happening than almost anything else, because what it doesn't account for is the cost of not trying. Not trying is not a neutral choice. Not trying is choosing to stay where you are while time passes. And at some point, the cost of not trying becomes far higher than the cost of failing. Epictetus, who had lost everything and was owned by someone else, and still managed to build a philosophy that would outlast Rome itself, put it simply, he who has no fear of death has already died in their life. Epictetus, the person who can't risk failure, has already accepted a kind of defeat. They're already living smaller than they're capable of. The try and fail path might be bumpy, but the never try path leads somewhere much darker. This one is sneakier, because you often can't even admit to yourself that it's there. You tell yourself you're not ready, but underneath, what you really mean is, I'm afraid of what people will think if I try this and it doesn't work out. What will my family think? My friends? The people who know me as this version of myself? What if I announce this thing and then it fails and everyone sees? Marcus Aurelius spent most of his life in the most public position imaginable, emperor of Rome, constantly observed and judged by millions. And he kept returning to the same truth. How much time he gains, who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does or thinks, but only at what he himself does. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. The time you spend managing how you look to others is time you're not spending building the thing you actually want. And the people whose opinions you're most afraid of, they're too busy worrying about their own lives to watch yours as closely as you think. This one surprises people when they first hear it. Fear of success. Why would anyone be afraid of succeeding? Because success means change, and change means leaving behind the version of yourself and your life that you currently know. Success might mean more responsibility, more visibility, different relationships, a different version of yourself that you've never met and don't know how to be yet. It also means that if you try your hardest and succeed, that's who you actually are. There's no more wondering whether you could have. You found out, and some people find the uncertainty of what they could be more comfortable than the reality of finding out. The Stoics had a name for this: attachment to what is familiar. They taught that we often confuse familiar with safe and unfamiliar with dangerous. But the familiar isn't always safe. Sometimes the most dangerous place you can stay is exactly where you already are. This one runs the deepest, and it might be the most honest version of fear that any of us carry. Not I'm afraid to fail, not I'm afraid what people will think, but what if I give this everything I have and it turns out that everything I have just isn't enough? What if I find out that my best isn't good enough? What if the person underneath all the potential and the plans and the intentions is just ordinary? This fear keeps people from starting because starting means eventually finding out the answer. And as long as you haven't started, you can still believe the answer might be yes. Seneca's response to this kind of fear was both compassionate and direct. He acknowledged that this is a real fear, that it feels real, that it deserves to be taken seriously. And then he said something that should shift everything. It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that things are difficult. Seneca, you don't know whether you're enough yet. Nobody does until they try. And the only way to find out is to step into the thing and let reality answer the question. The fear of not being enough grows largest in the absence of action. It shrinks dramatically the moment you begin. Part 3. How the Stoics actually dealt with fear. Here's the first thing to understand about the Stoic approach to fear. They didn't try to stop feeling it. They didn't tell themselves fear was bad or weak or something to be ashamed of. They recognized it as a natural human experience, and then they developed a very specific practice for not letting it be the deciding factor. Marcus Aurelius was afraid. He wrote about it. He felt the weight of decisions that could affect millions of lives. He felt the pull of wanting to avoid the hard thing, the uncertain thing, the thing where he might be wrong. What made him extraordinary was not the absence of that fear. It was what he did next. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. Power over your mind. Not power over the outcome. Not certainty that it will work out. Oh, just the power to choose what you do with the feeling that's in front of you. That's the Stoic offer. And it's enough. The Stoics used a practice called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of bad things. We introduced this in Season 1 when we talked about negative visualization. But today I want to show you how it applies specifically to fear. Here's how it works. Instead of avoiding the fear, you walk directly toward it in your imagination. You ask, what is the actual worst thing that could happen here? Not the vague, abstract fear. The specific, real, concrete worst case. I try this and it fails. What actually happens? I lose some money. I feel embarrassed. Some people see me fail. I have to start over or pivot. I feel disappointed for a while. And then you ask the next question, could I handle that? Almost always, the honest answer is yes. Not that it would be fun. Not that it wouldn't hurt. But yes, you could survive it. You could learn from it. You could come back from it. And the moment you see clearly that you could handle the worst case, the fear loses much of its power. Because fear feeds on vagueness. It feeds on the unknown. When you make it specific, when you look directly at it and say, okay, this is what I'm actually afraid of, and here's what I would actually do, it becomes manageable. Arnold Schwarzenegger has talked openly about being terrified before competitions. Not confident, not fearless, terrified, stomach tight, hands shaking, genuinely afraid of losing, of being embarrassed, of all the work, meaning nothing in the end. His solution was not to eliminate the fear. His solution was to decide in advance what losing would mean. He worked out specifically what he would do if he didn't win. He made a plan. He decided how he would respond. And once he had that plan, once the worst case was no longer an unknown, the fear changed shape. It was still there, but it no longer had the same grip. He went on to win Mr. Olympia 7 times. This is exactly what the Stoics were describing. You don't remove fear by pretending it isn't there. You defang it by making it specific and then deciding in advance how you will respond to the outcome you're most afraid of. Part 4. What living without fear actually looks like. I want to be really clear about something. The goal is not to become a person who doesn't feel fear. That is not a real option. Fear is a biological response that has been wired into human beings for hundreds of thousands of years. You are not going to think your way out of it, or meditate your way out of it, or read enough philosophy to never feel it again. The goal is to become a person who feels fear and acts anyway. That is a completely different goal, and it is actually achievable. This distinction matters enormously, because if you're waiting to stop being afraid before you do the thing, you're going to wait forever. But if you understand that action doesn't require the absence of fear, that courage is not fearlessness, but fear with a decision attached to it. Then you can act right now, exactly as you are. The Stoics defined courage, one of their 4 core virtues, not as the absence of fear, but as the correct response to a dangerous or uncertain situation. Correct meaning, proportionate, considered, chosen, rather than reactive. A courageous person is not someone who feels nothing. A courageous person is someone who feels the fear, examines it, decides it is not a good enough reason to stop, and moves forward anyway. That is a practice. It can be built. It gets easier with repetition. Every time you choose to act despite fear, you build evidence that you are the kind of person who acts despite fear. And over time, that evidence accumulates into an identity. And that identity, I am someone who does hard things even when I'm afraid, becomes one of the most powerful things you can carry. Let me connect this to where we are in the series. In Season 1, Episode 1, we talked about the invisible chains that keep life stuck. Fear is one of those chains, probably the heaviest one. In Episode 3 of Season 1, we talked about how emotions create judgments that create responses. Fear is exactly that. It creates a judgment that says this is too dangerous, and that judgment produces avoidance. In Episode 1 of this season, we found that the stories keeping people average are usually rooted in fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of finding out the truth about what they're capable of. And in Episode 3 of this season, we'll look at overthinking, which is, in most cases, fear in its most sophisticated disguise. The mind that can't stop analyzing, can't stop considering every angle, can't make a decision and commit. That mind is almost always afraid, and we'll have a specific method for that. But first, you need this episode, because if you don't deal with fear directly, every other practice runs into it eventually. It is the wall behind the wall. The practical solution, the fear audit here, is your practice for this episode. It's a single exercise, 3 questions, that you apply to whatever you've been most afraid to do. It's built directly on the Stoic practice of premeditatio malorum and the tools from Season 1, Episode 3. It takes about 10 minutes. Do it today. Pick the one thing you've been avoiding because you're afraid. Not a vague category. One specific thing. The conversation. The project. The application. The decision. The change. That one thing. Now answer these 3 questions in writing. 1. What specifically am I afraid of? Not, I'm afraid it won't work out. Get specific. I'm afraid that I'll spend 6 months on this, and it will fail, and I'll feel like an idiot. I'm afraid my family will think I'm being irresponsible. I'm afraid that if I try my hardest, and it still doesn't work, I'll have to face the fact that I'm not as capable as I thought I was. Write the actual fear, word for word, as honestly as you can. The raw version, the one you haven't said out loud. Because a fear that has a specific name is a fear you can work with. 2. What is the actual worst case, and could I handle it? Take the fear you just named and play all the way out, not the vague, terrifying version, the actual, concrete, realistic worst case. What would really happen? Then ask, could I survive that? Could I come back from it? Could I learn from it and try again? Be honest. In almost every case, the honest answer is yes. Not that it would be easy, not that it wouldn't hurt, but yes, you would come back. And knowing that changes the fear from something you can't face to something you can factor in and move past. 3. What is the cost of not doing this? This is the question most people never ask. They weigh the risks of trying against the false safety of not trying. But not trying has a cost too. It has the cost of a year from now being exactly where you are today. It has the cost of looking back at this moment and knowing you chose the fear over the possibility. It has the cost of never finding out the answer to the question your fear has been keeping you from asking. Write that cost down. Make it real. Because the fear of failure feels very large, but the cost of not trying, when you actually put it in front of you, is often larger. 3 questions, 10 minutes, one specific thing. What you will find when you do this honestly is that the fear shrinks, not disappears, but shrinks to a size where it is no longer the deciding factor, where you can see it clearly, understand it, and then make a real choice. Not a choice driven by avoiding the fear, but a choice made with the fear fully in view. That is what Marcus Aurelius was doing in his journal every morning, looking directly at the things that could go wrong, deciding how he would respond, and then going out and facing the day, not because the fear was gone, but because he had already decided it wasn't going to stop him. It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. The fear of what might happen if you try is real, but it is smaller than the cost of a life lived around the edges of what you actually wanted. Do the audit today, before tomorrow gives you a new reason to wait. Before you go, one thing, right now. In the comments below, write the one thing you've been afraid to do, not the comfortable version, the honest one. The thing that comes to mind when you ask yourself, what am I really avoiding? Write it here, because naming it publicly, even to strangers on the internet, is an act of courage. It is the first step of the practice. You're not committing to success, you're committing to honesty, and honesty is where everything starts. I'll be reading every single one. Think about someone in your life who is being held back by fear. Not lazy, not incapable, just afraid. You can see the potential, you can see what they could do, and you can see the fear that's keeping them exactly where they are. Send this episode to them, not to tell them they're afraid, just because sometimes the right idea at the right moment is exactly what breaks the pattern. Maybe this is that moment for them. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because episode 3 of season 2 is how to stop overthinking, and it connects directly to everything we talked about today. Overthinking is what fear looks like when it gets sophisticated, and we have a very specific method for it. Don't miss it. I want to close with something. The fear you've been carrying and the one that's been quietly running your decisions, keeping you from starting, keeping you inside the boundaries of what feels safe. It is not the truth about what you're capable of. It is not a verdict. It is not a wall that can't be moved. It is a signal, and like all signals, it deserves to be examined, not obeyed. The Stoics spent their lives doing exactly that, examining, questioning, choosing their response rather than just reacting to their feelings. And the result was not a fearless life. It was a full one. A life lived in the direction of what they actually valued, with the fear present but not in charge. That is available to you. Not someday, starting with the audit you're going to do today. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. Stop arguing with the fear. Examine it, name it, step through it. I'll see you in episode 3.